What's going on, everybody? Excited to announce our very first episode, our new segment, What's in the Cup. This is going to be myself, Jack Blackwell, and a good longtime friend, Wesley McKnight, where we're going to take our opportunity to voice some opinions on some upcoming events, whether that's sports or whatever might else be going on. And basically, we're keeping that in the constraints of one glass of whatever we choose to drink. So we're thinking that's going to probably differ, depending on the topic we're talking about or whatever it may be. But before we get into all that, how you doing tonight, Wes?
Doing pretty good, man. I'm excited to dive into a topic with you. I think this is a cool new segment we can do. I know in our podcast we usually talk about a bunch of different things, but I think it'd be cool to jump into just different events, different things that are going on, and really just have a chat. So, a couple things though. First, I want to ask, what is on your hat? Can we lean into the
Oh
camera there
no.
and just show everyone what's going on here?
So we got a nice
In
in and out automotive lubrication expert. And you'll find out soon why I think that was very fitting for this little segment that we're going to do today. But yeah, great hat, and I felt it was completely worthy. But no, actually, let's go ahead. Let's kick things off, Wes. I got to ask, man, what's in the cup?
Yeah, man. So I got already a drink poured tonight, and I'm gonna
Okay.
drink some ranch water, man. So for those that
Ranch
don't know
water.
what ranch water is, you gotta get you some Jose Cuervo, all right,
Okay.
a little bit of tequila, and then you gotta mix it up with a little Topo Chico, all right.
Oh,
So it's a
cool.
good, refreshing drink. Typically I like to drink it during the summer, some of those warm days, coming home after a long day of work. But you know what? I figured it was fitting for the show today, considering what we're going to talk about is not so cold there.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and just go ahead and sip on this today. What about you, Jack?
Yeah, there you go. So in my cup, I went to go with a solid savory whiskey screwball. Your peanut butter flavored whiskey. It's not too bad, but mostly because exactly kind of where you were at because of what we're talking about today. So I went with screwball because if anybody was paying attention this weekend, my man's Lewis Hamilton got screwed. And that's exactly what we're here. That's exactly why we're on the mics, here to talk about what went on there. So, Wes, you want to kick it off? Give us a little intro into F1 and why this past weekend was so exciting.
Yeah, man, I would love to. Yeah, so just kind of talking about F1 as a whole. So this is something that Jack got me into this year, and I really didn't get into it to probably last like 6 races of the season. But just kind of set the plot of what actually happened this weekend. So this past year was probably will probably go down in history being one of the best years, most competitive years of Formula One history. To be honest with you, so we had a head-to-head battle the entire year for the drivers' championship between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. All right. So this took quite a few turns. And I think the point we really want to jump off here today, kind of in the story and the timeline of this, is Silverstone. Is that correct, Jack?
Yeah, and I think that both yourself and me, I think really got into F1 this year. We talked a lot about it on the podcast. If you guys haven't checked that out, definitely take a look on Spotify. We've had a bunch of conversations about F1, but yeah, I think that a little before Silverstone, I think we were approaching the idea of F1, and then Silverstone happened, and it was like from that point on, we were locked in. We were watching every race that was on TV. And to bring up that Silverstone, why that was so crazy, especially for us in that, as newcomers, is because we're kind of in that point of the season where Max Verstappen had a good lead in the drivers' championship, and everyone knows, Lewis Hamilton is this great, driver, and even from the small things that we had seen at that point, we're starting to see that kind of take off. And we go into this Silverstone race, and they crash, right? And I believe Silverstone is where they took each other out, and neither of them finished. Is that right?
No, so Silverstone, Lewis did finish. He actually went on to win that race. So, like you're saying, Max Verstappen was leading at that point in the drivers' championship.
That's right.
Yep.
Okay. You know what? No, and you're right, and I'm glad you bring that up because this is actually the reason where if you talk to me the last several weeks, I was really running and gunning for Lewis Hamilton because you're absolutely right. They did collide. Max got ran off. He couldn't finish the race, and I actually remember it was somewhat of a serious crash, and Max ended up going to the hospital. And so when the race finished, Hamilton finished first, is huge, and that started his momentum to where what led into what this past weekend. But basically, Hamilton was on the podium celebrating as he should be, just won this crazy race. And I remember, especially as a novice to the sport, seeing Max Verstappen tweeting, complaining that Lewis Hamilton was so happy he won. And that was like the first step that took me off of Max Verstappen. That was the first time I had to take a step back and say, because usually I like the underdog, I like a little cockiness, I like that kind of player, that athlete. But this was a situation where I saw Max just kind of being a little bit of a baby, and I think that guided me to kind of cheer for Lewis a little bit more.
Yeah. It's funny. I have to imagine this is where the serious rivalry kind of took off for just this season. And
Right,
it's funny you say that because me just looking back at this video really before I was into Formula One racing, to me it looks like Max just takes I mean Lewis just takes him straight out in this race,
right.
in the Silverstone Stone
Yeah,
race, to be honest with you. Which is interesting. I know they went back and forth the rest of the season and we've seen a lot of sparks kind of flying, but this is one incident where like to me, this is all on Lewis. So I
right.
find
And
it interesting that brought you to be a fan of his
well,
as a
right. And
result of this incident.
what's so crazy that you bring that up is that, a lot of people, when you talk about Max Verstappen, he's the aggressor. He's
Mhm.
the guy making the aggressive moves. And, it goes back to just, what you enjoy watching out racing. And that's where all his fans come from. He sticks his elbows when he goes around these guys,
Mhm.
and so it was interesting, that at this time, even before I had a full grasp of, how Max drove, to see Lewis do that, it just, I don't know. Like I said, it got me a little warmed up, and then to
Yeah.
see Max's tweets, it startled me a bit. But okay, so he wrapped up Silverstone. What happened after Silverstone? Remind me.
Yeah, so after Silverstone, they went on, and Max kind of went on a little bit of a run here. So he got a couple wins actually. So Belgium Grand Prix, Dutch Grand Prix, um, and then it kind of goes back and forth. So Daniel Ricciardo, well, and then we go into the Italian Grand
Oh,
Prix.
did
All right,
yep, yep.
and this is where you talked about at first you thought, okay, they both or left the race at Silverstone due to a wreck, and they did not
Hmm.
there. But in this
They
particular
did in
race,
Italy. Yep.
yes, they did. So both of them got back into it. They got into a wreck again. Both drivers retired that day. It was kind of interesting because Max's car was actually like up on top of Lewis's in the wreck. So
Right.
it's pretty
Yeah, and
cool.
to bring that up too, there were times where I'd seen clips of, different people on Mercedes specifically where they complained about that little halo device. They think it's kind of bogus. It's not really the nature of what F1, but you watch that accident they had in Italy. I mean, thank
Yeah.
God that halo was there, cuz Max's tire would have kind of run over Lewis. It would have been a whole nother deal. So that was a
Yep.
crazy kind of ending to that race. It was
Yep.
something else.
100%. And then after that race, Lewis did get a win. But then for the three races after that, so the Turkish Grand Prix, the United States Grand Prix, the Mexican Grand Prix, Max won two of those three races and finished top three in the other, where Lewis was far behind. I might have said Lewis there. I meant to say Max. Max
Yep.
won two of those races and then finished up second in the other. So at this point, we just finished up the Mexican Grand Prix. And Max has a pretty sizable lead here, so
Yep.
he's pretty much out of touch, or everyone thinks he's out of touch. And then miraculously, Lewis comes in and wins three straight races. So he goes into Brazil, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia and gets it done. But what's super interesting is we had an interesting track at Saudi Arabia, a track
Right.
that I think we could say probably should have been earlier in the season. So it was a new track for Formula One going there. It was a street track. It was tight, a lot of carnage, but they
Well,
raced there.
absolutely. And no, and I want to stop there just for a second, because this Abu Dhabi, or sorry, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, it was bizarre. I mean, even for someone like ourselves who didn't really know what to expect watching F1 races, we knew how crazy it was. I mean, and the thing about it is, this was all known going into the race. I mean, they just finished building the track shortly before they came down, but everyone knew the setup for it. Everyone knew that it was going to be this wild race. And I like the point that you made. And I remember talking about this right after, we watched that race, is I remember you saying, there's no way that a race that is this crazy should be the second to last race of the season, where these guys have, potentially could be in this very close battle, which they end up being in. And, I think you're right, because my thoughts after that race was that shouldn't be a track that's in there. And you kind of counterpointed me and said, no, that's a fun race to watch. Let's get it as the second race of the season, not the second to last. And I think that was a great point. I think as nuts as it was, I'd love to watch that race again, but with the battle going on, man, it was a little hard to watch.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I don't want to kind of have that conversation today too much about the
Mm,
track. I do have some
right.
opinions. I do think they should go back there. It was a
Yeah.
lot of fun. That thing is a bad mamma jamma when it comes to being a fast track. I'll tell you that. But what was interesting about this is Max came in, and even after Lewis winning the past two races, he had a chance to put it away here. All right, so a lot of things had to go his way. So if he would have won, got fastest lap, and Lewis would have finished no higher than sixth, he would have won the
Mm,
drivers' championship.
yep.
But if anyone that watched that race, we saw that hey, that didn't happen. So Lewis went on to take it, and Max finished second in that race. But what that meant is going into Abu Dhabi. I can't believe I said that right.
There we go. There we
Um,
go. Abu Dhabi, beautiful.
they were tied up. So we came in, final race of the season, tied up for the drivers' championship. A lot of sparks flying all season long. And that's kind of where I want to leave this off and hand it back to you, man. Just
Yeah.
talk
Y-
about the race, kind of talk us through what happened there, and then let's get some opinions on what went down.
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing to kick it off, so they were tied going into this last race in Abu Dhabi, which is insane. I think I saw somewhere that had only happened one time in the whole history of F1. So definitely super rare, makes it even more exciting. But what was interesting is that over the course of the season and all the races, Verstappen actually had one more first place finish than Lewis did. And I often wondered, if it came down to a situation where one was closely behind the other at the end of the race, would you kind of feel like maybe I'll just clip him, neither of us finish, and we tie? But that actually isn't the case. It would have gone to Max Verstappen because he had that additional first place. So it absolutely bizarre coming into the race, and to come into it in qualifying, Max looked great. He came out and he set pole position, and that was I remember listening to some of the post qualifying stuff, and there was a lot of thoughts like, man, is Max just going to kind of run away with it? I mean, if he can keep that pace, which is kind of crazy because I feel like that was every race we heard about Max. Going into the race at Saudi Arabia, everyone was saying before he crashed on that last lap that his time was unbelievable. Like he was just setting the bar so far above everybody. And I think he actually qualified, what was it, 3/10 of a second faster than Lewis. And we should fact check that, but I believe so. So we have this. So we had Max going off at pole, and we had Lewis right there at second. And lights off, away they go. And Lewis just has a hell of a start. And if you're watching the race, and I definitely encourage you to go back and watch it again. But you see, like, I feel like Max, his first move right out the gate was to defend because you see him pull into the middle. And I thought that was crazy because you just see Lewis gun forward. So he's off, and you see Max kind of come in. And I just feel like Max came in and realized he lost time doing that. And by the time he corrected it, Lewis was off in front of him. So Lewis takes off, and they go around the first couple turns. I think they were coming in, and I should have known this coming in, but it was either the third, the fourth turn. Do you recall which one it is?
I think it was the fourth, if I'm not
Okay,
mistaken. I
so
think it was the
coming
fourth
into the
turn.
fourth turn, here comes Max. He's creeping up, and I believe Max was on softer tires at this point as well, so he's got a little more grip too. And
Yep.
he lunges into turn four, and he actually beats Lewis. It's kind of crazy. It was a great move, but the way he beat Lewis completely cuts Lewis off, right? So Lewis Hamilton needs to slam on the brakes. And what I would figure happens is he kind of at that point gives up the position. He's been beat out on the turn, but that's not what he does. And I'd love to get your opinion on this in a second because basically what happens is Lewis gets run off the track. And instead of braking and following, he just cuts the whole damn corner. I mean, he's off, and he all of a sudden turns, Max was just barely in front of him, turns it into like a 2-second lead going down. And I remember the the radio mics were going insane between Red Bull and Michael Massey, I believe, and then also the Mercedes team. And it's crazy because they didn't end up awarding Max Verstappen a penalty for that, or Lewis Hamilton for cutting off the road. And what was interesting is part of the reason Lewis didn't have to give that spot back is because the stewards said that he had given up the advantage that he took, which was bizarre because he got a 2-second advantage, and then at the time they declared he didn't have to give anything back. He was at like 1.6, 1.8, so it was like he didn't really give the advantage back. But let's take a step back, Wes. What do you think? What were your thoughts going into this? What were your thoughts? Kind of how everything got ruled and turned out in that.
Yeah, man, it was crazy kind of going into that turn. First things first, it's funny, and we kind of talked about this before the show, how much you are defending Max in certain situations when you've been a
Right.
fan of Lewis, and I'm kind of on the flip
Absolutely.
side, because my first reaction watching this was the fact that my mind, Max braked way too late. All right, so I think he
Hmm.
could have braked earlier. He needed to give Lewis the line, but he didn't, and then Lewis cut off the track. So I think for one, I don't know if Max really should have went in that hot and break that late. But let's set that aside. And it sounds like everyone else in Formula One does not really agree with that statement. So that probably means I'm in the wrong. But let's
Right.
say, okay, so he kept in the line, he kept in the track. Lewis cuts off the track and basically just cuts the whole turn.
Hmm.
What I find is interesting is through these events, I could see where the stewards would say, all right, yes, just give the distance back, give the gap
Hmm.
back. But
Right.
one thing I will say is Lewis never gave that gap back.
No,
So
he
at that
did
point,
not.
to me, the incident occurred while they were side by side. So I think he at least has to get all the way back to where Max is at to say, okay, I'm giving up this position.
Hmm.
But one take I do have on this, and I've heard a lot about this kind of after a lot of the other events, is I feel like this is partially because of Michael Massey not controlling the situation for the last few weeks. Okay.
Okay.
And hear me out is I feel like he tried to let things go and let these
Yep.
guys kind of manage it themselves for too long to what do you do in this situation? Like he's not at this point, he can't step in and say, "No, Lewis, you got to give the position back to Max."
Right.
It because he's given up control to them for the last 3 races now during all the chaos that's happened. So I think he kind of dug himself a hole here. I think if
Right.
they truly believe that there was something wrong on Lewis cutting that corner, they should have asked him to give the position back to Max. Now, with
Right.
that being said, it would not have mattered. Lewis went on to just basically
Hmm.
continue to increase that gap. He would have got right by Max, no problems. So it is interesting, but I think a lot of this comes back on Michael Massey. I really do. I
Yeah.
think he poorly managed the last 3 races this season.
Yeah, and we'll get into it a second, but that theme didn't change, at least not for the rest of this race. So yeah, so like you said, they kind of get in this big argument between Michael Massey, Red Bull, and Mercedes, and nothing really happens. Lewis continues carrying on, and he takes a big lead. Everything looks good. For a majority of the race, there were a couple pit stops that kind of took place between. I think both Max was first to stop, and he threw on the hard tires, and it wasn't shortly after that Lewis jumped in there and he threw on, I think, another set of hard tires.
Yep.
And they kind of just went on. And then that went on for, I think it was about 15, 20 laps. And then was it Max who then went and pitted again?
Yep. Yep. So with and I'd have to check this again. I want to say there were 15-ish laps left.
Hmm.
So Max put on the hards early in the race after running mediums to start out. Lewis went from hards to hards, 1 lap from each other. And then at that point, Max felt like his only shot was to get a fresh set of tires and try to run down Lewis for for the rest of the race. So
Right.
I believe he changed tires, put on another set of hards, and at that point Lewis had like a 20-second gap, so he's
Hmm.
out there for a while. But Max did go on to kind of run him down. So Lewis got caught up in some lap traffic, and with 10 laps to go, or Max was 10 or 11 seconds behind Lewis with 10
Yep.
laps to go. And at this point, I mean, he made the guess and his best call that like maybe Lewis's tires will fall out and maybe he
Hmm.
has an opportunity to catch him. but he's really just banking on something major happening with Lewis's tires at that point.
Yeah. And I think we skipped over a little. I want to make sure we give some credit to Perez here
Mhm.
in this race because Perez arguably made everything happen in this race. Basically, at, at somehow it was then Lewis went on to pit, and so it came out where Perez was at one, Lewis was at two, and Verstappen was at three. Now Verstappen's time behind Lewis was about it was 8 to 10 seconds, and Lewis is creeping up on Perez. And basically, we get the situation where for I think it was 1.5 to 2 laps, where Perez really holds down Lewis to the point where that 8 second lead that Max had get cut to 2 seconds, under 2 seconds. And all I could think about while Perez was doing this, I mean, not only did Hamilton overtake him and then he took that spot back, but then to hold him for even longer until that long straight where Hamilton was able to take the DRS and just get ahead. It reminded me of a couple weeks ago when Alonso got um, the podium finish, right? And there was a point of the race, I think Bottas was creeping up on Ocon, who was behind
Mhm.
Alonso. And you get a radio call from Alonso who's telling Ocon, tell Ocon to fight like a lion. And so all I could think the whole time is like Verstappen was in the mic telling, Christian Horner,
Yep.
tell Perez to fight like a lion. But
Yep.
so they and what happened, Max, Lewis was held up enough and Max was able to come back. And once all that happened, that's when I even remember Red Bull getting on the radio with Perez and saying, hey, just fall back. This is their fight. And Perez just did that, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because honestly, I would have skipped right over it, kind of forgot
Hmm.
about it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think Perez is the true hero here for Red Bull Racing.
Right.
I don't think Max would have won this race without him doing that. I
Right.
really don't. Because the whole tire situation had been different, the gap would have been different, the decision making, a lot of the stuff that went in to the end of that race would have been impacted by if he would not have went on to do that.
Right.
But it is super interesting because he did, and it's funny. Matt or Lewis was on the radio, kind of fired up about the racing being dangerous.
Hmm.
And to me, and I'd encourage anyone to go back and look at the highlights. I think it was some of the best racing you can
Oh,
do
it's great
that
racing.
is truly fair and hold someone up. I mean, he
Hmm.
was in the lead, he was ahead of them, so it wasn't like he was a lap down or anything like that. And he just straight up raced him. I mean, he
Yeah.
wasn't just
Oh,
like cutting him off in front of him. I mean, he truly raced his ass off for his teammate. And it was huge. I mean, it went on. That's Max could not have done this without him. So I thought that was really cool. And what's super interesting to me, and just give a lot of credit to Perez, is at the end of the end of the season last year, he didn't have a ride going into this year.
right.
So
Yeah. To
he didn't
come
know
over
where he was going
here
to end
and,
up. Yep, and he
and
lucked out and he ended up with Red Bull Racing, and he had a good year himself. And then also he brought his teammate home the drivers' championship. So
so we come down this race, this big fight between Perez and Lewis. Lewis gets ahead, but all of a sudden you see Verstappen creep up, and then it's back to those two battling. And if I remember correctly, Lewis kind of takes off again. And from the looks of it, it was his win to race, and he was doing exactly that. Is that right?
yep,
Yeah. So he went ahead, and they're coming down. There's about 6 laps left, and good old Williams driver Nicholas Latifi spins out. Back tires, I think, gave out on him. Tries to get them back straightened, and then ends up, going straight into the wall. And what did this do for the race, Wes?
yeah. So after this wreck, 5 laps left, I believe. So instantly caution went out. So caution car came out. It wasn't just the digital safety car; it was the actual safety car.
Hmm.
And for those that aren't super familiar with F1, what that means is the cars will actually bunch up behind the safety car. If it's virtual, you just have to maintain the same speed or same pace. You have 60% reduction in speed, but
Yep.
no one can advance or get behind where their current position's at on the track. But Red Bull instantly threw Max into the pits based on where they were at on the track. So before they all got bunched up behind the safety car, he went into the pits and basically went on and put on a soft set of tires. So
Yep.
soft set of
And-
tires are the quickest, but they don't last the longest. That's just a
right.
good way to think of it. When he came out, he was behind lap cars. But what's
Yep.
interesting is Red Bull just took the bet here to say, okay, on the restart, typically they will let lap cars get back on the lead lap, so go out in front of the cars, so they would clear out between himself and Lewis, so he would be directly behind Lewis on the restart.
Hmm. Yeah, and I want to jump back here just for 1 second because I thought this going the minute the safety car came out, I knew it was not a good thing for Lewis. And here's why. There's a sliver, not even sliver, a large part of you thinks, okay, the race is going to end under the safety car. So, Lewis is going to win because that's how it works. No one can, the laps still go when there's a safety car, but just no one can pass, right? So Lewis was in first, Max was in second. But the reason I think this screwed up the other half of it, why this really screwed Lewis, is because he was completely, he could not go pit before Max did. Because if he did go pit, Max would have taken first place. So if the virtual safety or the regular safety car doesn't finish the race, then Max goes on to win it. But then if Max pits, now Lewis can't pit because if he pits, once again, he's going to come out behind Max. So the minute that Max pitted, there was a sliver of an advantage that he gained. And all that advantage was with the hope that somehow there would be a restart before the end of this race. And somehow the people, the back markers that weren't in front of him, but were placed in front of him were moved out of the way. And
Mhm.
for some reason, that's exactly what happened. Michael
Yep.
Massey decided to bless Red Bull, to bless Max Verstappen, and that's what they did. So walk me through that, Wes.
Yeah, so I think 2 laps left. Michael Massey comes on the radio and says that he will not allow the lap cars to lap or
Hmm.
to pass.
Right,
So at this point, Max thinks that he's going to have to fight or pass 3 cars. Actually, Perez even comes into the pits to reduce one of those cars. So there were
right,
4 cars, and that's why you see him went to. Why you see why he went to the garage. And he says, "Okay, we're not going to get rid of it." At that point, I mean, Red Bull played their cards. They tried to do what they can do, but I mean, what are they going to argue at that point? That's what the race director says. So Max is
right.
going to attempt to pass those 3 cars, and then also catch Lewis on these fresh set of soft tires and maybe do something. And who knows? He might have, because those cars technically have to get out of his way, but he also
Right.
doesn't have DRS because the first couple laps.
Well, and keep
Uh,
in mind too, at this point, he doesn't even know if the race is gonna restart.
yeah,
This is
it
all
might not.
still with the hope that maybe he gets a lap or two.
Yep. But this is where things got interesting.
Yeah.
Is Michael Massey then changes his mind and lets just the 3 cars
Yeah.
between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton get ahead of Lewis and go, and then they restart with 1 lap left. So 1 lap to decide the drivers' championship. And I'm just going to go through what actually happened, and then we'll kind of diagnose some of the different things. So
Absolutely.
they go green. They go through a few turns. You can tell Max is being very, very patient. He had the speed, but he was just waiting for the right term or right time to strike, because you have to imagine he has to really be able to clear Lewis, because
Oh, for
what does
sure.
Lewis have to lose at this point? I mean, he's
Hmm.
not going to let just give him the turn. So he does that. He waits for his point. He goes on. He passes Lewis, and then goes on to the checker flag. Ends up winning the Grand Prix, and then
Yep.
also winning the drivers' championship. So that's just kind of what happened. Now, I want to just dive in here. A few minutes left, and just get each of our thoughts. So, Jack, why don't you go ahead and kick it off here? Just what's your thoughts on this whole situation and how the season ended?
Absolutely. I only got a couple sips left, so I'll try to
Same,
make
brother.
this quick before it's gone. Yeah, so basically, I think it's bogus. Like I said, screwball because Lewis got screwed, and that's the simple fact of it. Look, here's the way that it works. What happened at the end of the race is not in the rule book. What you saw happen was the commissioner of the league trying to make it more fun to watch. So I understand there are going to be people that argue, yeah, like Michael Massey said, it was a more motor race. I left it to motor racing. There's that side of the argument. I think that argument is completely wrong. I think there are rules that set out to place. The rules are that under a safety car, no cars can pass, whether it's back markers or not. And so all of a sudden, just because we have this championship race down the end of the line, you change the rules. Who if it would be one thing if somehow both of them had on fresh soft tires. If it was a true fair fight, Lewis had a little bit of an advantage in first place. I think maybe I'm more open to the idea. That wasn't the case. Everyone knew Max had a clear advantage going into that last lap. Lewis is on his old hard tires, Max on the freshest tires that he could ever have. I mean, you knew Max was going to pass him in that last lap, and like I said, it's just not the rules. And I kind of, I try to put it in the perspective of football. I think if it would be like if a team was kneeling on third down, to close out the game, and all of a sudden, NFL commissioner comes over and says like, "No, I'm going to call an NFL timeout, and we're going to give the other team the ball and give them a chance to come down the field," because that would be more interesting. That's what you saw this past weekend in the F1 race. That's what cost Lewis Hamilton, his championship. I think it's bogus. I think, it's exciting. It talked up the beef, but at the end of the day, I think the wrong person went home with the trophy. I think both of them fought hard, but I think this was one Lewis should have walked away with. And I want to leave you just on one point. I'll let you finish off and finish my glass. It was really interesting listening to the press conference afterwards, because there was a moment the reporter was talking to Lewis, and he was asking him, "Hey, we're seeing you drive the best you've ever driven. You're still at your peak. How excited you for next year?" And Lewis came out and responded and said, "I just hope everybody has a safe Christmas." And what I took that as is Lewis dodging that question, because I think Lewis was so pissed off at what happened that in the back of his head, he says, "I'm not coming back to, an F1 race when this is going to be how the last race ends." So that's my 2 cents. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to finish my glass as you wrap us up.
Yeah, man. So a couple things there. I do not think you're wrong. I do think you're exaggerating a little bit. Okay,
Oh,
so that's where I'll
goodness.
start. So here's my honest thought: is if they were going to do that, I don't have a problem with them restarting on one lap, letting the lap cars go ahead and pass. Okay, that's part of that is in the rule books. Okay, that it is allowed to happen. If they're going to restart under a safety car, they can do that. Here's my biggest issue with how it went down. Don't come in and say that you're not going to allow it.
Yep.
Okay, and then turn around very last second and say you're going to, and make sure everyone is just scrambling at that point. I mean, Lewis barely knew before that restart that those cars were going to pass. And my biggest problem is you can't, what isn't in the rules is saying that you can have three cars between the two, between Lewis or between Max and Lewis pass. It's
Hmm.
an all or nothing type of thing. And what's interesting is if they would have done that, I bet you Boltas would have taken his good old time getting past,
Oh, for
and more
sure.
than likely they would have never went green. So
Hmm.
that's the tough part. Now the other side of this would say I think they both racers were deserving of the championship. Lewis was the better driver today, and that's when it really mattered. But at the end of the day, I think they both deserved a shot at it. For Max's sake, I mean, I'm sure he's happy. I hate that it went down like this because now it feels like it's not fair to Lewis, like he didn't deserve it. But at
Almost
the
like an
same time,
asterisk.
yeah. But at the same time, I mean, Max was a couple big crashes away from just running
Right.
away with this
Yeah,
thing
from
anyway.
being done with it, with
Yeah.
plenty of races left.
So I think to me, I do think Max deserves the championship, or like I to me there shouldn't be an asterisk beside it.
No,
I
I would.
don't think, yeah, I don't think the race was handled right. I really do not. I to me, I don't know how Michael Massey is still like in his position next year.
Yeah, we'll
I would be
see.
very surprised. I'm hearing he will be. But yeah, that's just kind of my take, man. But one thing that's got me interested is I know you said Lewis will not kind of was hesitant, like he might not come back next year. I think Formula One, because of this, is going to grow bigger than it's ever been. And this is
Hmm.
just kicking that off. I know there's a little bit of chaos and controversy, but I am so pumped for next year. So
Oh,
go ahead and wrap it up, Jack. I know we're pushing our time here and our drinks are gone. So go ahead
yeah,
and
it
wrap
was a
us up.
long drink for both of us. Absolutely. No, I think at the end of the day, I think you wrapped it up pretty well. I think the way F1's growing, I think Lewis is too good of a driver to be able to back away. Especially next year, it's going to be insane. Coming out with brand new builds for the cars. It's really supposed to shake things up. I'm super excited. I'm sure we're going to be following it closely. That's the end of the first segment of What's in Your Cup. Once again, it's been fun, Wes, really hitting F1, boiling down to kind of what led up to such a crazy weekend this past weekend. Definitely excited. Check us out. Keep keep updated. Take a look for any new episodes. Like I said, we're going to be going for a lot of big events, fights, maybe different sporting events or different concerts, things that are going on in the world that we think, we should sit down and have one drink and really talk it out. So I appreciate you guys giving us a watch. Make sure you head over to Spotify. Give us a listen on all our episodes on Spotify. We're really trying to keep it coming out weekly, keep you guys up to date. And we're getting the YouTube page. So if you're here already, you might as well click over, subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Make it worth our while for coming out here and do it. Hey, Wes, thanks. This has been a lot of fun. I can't wait to see what we're talking about next.
Yep. I'll see you, man.